Hello, I'm Toycat, and we're not used to great economic data in the UK, but recently we had this. Our currency, the pound, has hit a 2-year high against the US dollar, and it's been gaining against most other major world currencies. This is good news because every pound that we have here is now worth a slightly larger amount of international currency, but why is it that £1 buys you $1.32 now, but it used to buy you 1.21? What is it that causes a currency to actually move up and down, and why is it good news if your currency goes up, but it's not necessarily bad news when your currency goes down? Japan's yen has been falling for a very long time, for most of the last 30 years to be totally honest, and despite the fact that it's been falling, it's actually more of a mixed bag than necessarily bad news. And so why is it that your currency can be in free fall and be in a real bad situation, and that can be just as good as your currency going up? Well, it's because of the fun world of currencies, and there's one thing I want to dive into today, which by the way will be currencies gaining against the dollar that you would never expect. I guarantee you won't know any of them, but first things first, why is the pound gaining against the dollar? For anyone living in the UK, the basic story is the fact that in the UK, our Bank of England has confirmed that they're not going to cut the interest rates for that in the near future. The Bank of England chair, he was in the Kansas City Federal Reserve's annual economic conference in Jackson Hole. He said that further interest rates could not be rushed because it was still too soon to be sure that inflation was beaten. We are prioritizing beating inflation over cutting interest rates, whereas the Federal Reserve chairman of the United States has said that no, the time has come, we're cutting US interest rates. In other words, now investors know for a fact, or at least are pricing into their market predictions, that the US interest rate is going to be lower than that of the UK, making it a wise move to move currency from the US dollar to the pound, therefore increasing the price of the pound relative to the US dollar. Whereas the exact opposite thing is happening in Japan. In case you're curious as to why this is happening, the Bank of Japan's interest rate is 0.1%, whereas the Federal Reserve's interest rate is 5.25 to 5.5. Japan recently had negative interest rates until the recent crisis, and so as a result, their currency has been in a free fall for a while, and since the US has started to consider lowering theirs, has it kind of recovered. A dollar used to buy you 160 yen, but recently that's been kind of mildened down to about 145. Why is this happening? Because investors are looking at the yen and saying it's a poor investment relative to the dollar, or rather, investors who have a lot of yen are saying we could put our money in the dollar and we get a better interest rate from that. But how is it that the interest rate that you pay on your mortgage or get on your savings, how does that have any impact on the price of your currency? It seems like the two things should be unlinked, and indeed, if you look at most currencies that fall, again, outside of the major world ones, when they fall, it's not necessarily a good thing or related to interest rates. If you look at like Nigerian Naira, for example, you can see it used to be worth 100 Naira to the dollar back in 2007, but now you get 1,500 Naira to your dollar. In other words, their currency is devalued 15 times, and that's not necessarily because like, oh, their interest rates are just so low, they've got negative 500% interest rates. No, there's other things that affect a currency too, and that's why it's generally considered not good if your currency is devaluing. It's if you look at the dong, by the way, this is a recent exchange rate I've had to learn, but if you look at, I've got some fun plans with some dongs, let me tell you, but I recently have been working this out, and you can look at it and you can see that even though they've gone through something similar, it's a much milder cut, whereas when you go to something like the lira, it's a sign of just how bad it is for Turkish people, because they used to get close to 1-to-1 in the financial crisis. Now it's 35-to-1. For every lira that you have in Turkey and every asset that is priced in lira and only exchangeable for lira, you now get a significantly less amount of dollars, which is terrible if you were between the two countries, but it's even more terrible if you're in a situation where you are in Turkey and you need to buy international goods. You know, there are two types of imports where you need another currency. One of those is when you go to another country, but the other one is when you bring goods from that country to you. This is why, even though there are lots of things happening in the yuan, the Chinese yuan, even though a lot of people say they're like deliberately devaluing it, you can actually look at their currency and say, yeah, it stays relatively stable because even big news doesn't affect it that much because there's a lot of trading going on, whereas it's less true for the lira or for the dong or for anything else like that. And that's why if you look at some currency pairs, they make it their whole priority, a big part of their thing about keeping their exchange rate somewhat stable. I think the craziest one is the Hong Kong dollar. I'm always shocked to see just how stable, relatively speaking, this stays. At least I think it might be against the pound that they balance their currency. But if you look at certain currency pairs, they try to keep them as stable as is humanly possible, and this is because to them it's important that their currency be a stable one and a good one to do business in. So this is a big part of how currencies go down. However, with the pound, maybe the pound's a bad example because there's a lot of British people who want to downplay our role in the world. But if you take a major world currency and compare it to the dollar, like the pound, let's be honest, if you try to do that, you're going to end up realizing that both currencies are are quite widely traded, and there's a lot of reasons to move from one to the other, and you don't have to worry that it's going to be devalued 10 times over, which means that actually the movement of money between the two currencies is small but has big impacts on the people living there, relatively speaking. Why is it the case that you used to get $2 to the pound back in 2008 and now you get 1.32? Well, let's explain with everyone's favorite part of this channel, diagrams of Toycat. So here is my fun explanation of how currency conversions work. I feel like trying to explain how interest rates affect this and how that goes on is kind of insanity unless we take a just look at the world and imagine that there are just two currencies that exist. There's the dollar, and then there's whichever one you're trying to imagine. There's just two currencies in this world and two groups of people, and if these two groups of people are entirely unlinked, if no one has ever gone from one country to the other, if they never interact, the exchange rate between the currencies doesn't actually matter. The value difference that exists in this in between them has no relevancy in the world, because people from here would never want dollars, and people from here would never want their pound, yen, euro, Swiss francs, and so as a result there would be no trade between the currencies, and so there would be no exchange rate. In the same way, I guess the closest thing we have on Earth is the fact that if there was space dollars happening out there, if there were aliens who had their own currency, that alien money wouldn't be worth any pounds, dollars, or gold bars, because they wouldn't have any need for our currency and they wouldn't come here to use it anyway, and so that's kind of what happens when two economies aren't linked. However, the moment someone goes from one country to the other, let's imagine Mr. European here goes to the US, then what happens when that happens is that that person needs to buy these US dollars, now they'll be living there, and they probably are going to need to get rid of their pounds, yen, euros, francs, and so they need to find someone who's going to sell them dollars, except if it's only one person, they won't be able to. So instead you need to imagine that one person from each side moves and switches countries. So he moves over here, and this person moves over there. When they do this, they exchange, and if both economies are perfectly balanced, let's just imagine they are, then they can say, hey, I'll give you one of my dollars and you can give me one of your pounds, and they'll say, yeah, actually that seems fair. That will give me this, an apple costs £1 in each country, so we'll just exchange our currency 1 to 1. However, then, start to imagine that prices go up in one country relative to the other, inflation occurs, that currency is effectively going down in value, and as the currency goes down in value, you would rather have a currency which is maintaining its value, and so people would be desperate to sell their dollars, people would be desperate to get out of there, and instead be moving into something else. So we'll show this with that. People would be desperately trying to move their money into pounds, even if they didn't necessarily live there, and so the value of the dollar relative to the pound would go down. You can imagine if there is a total share of value in the world, more of that money would be held in pounds as people aren't confident in their currency. This is why central banks basically need to exist to maintain a currency's existence and need in the world. However, another interesting thing that happens, as you've seen from these interest rate news that affect the pound and the yen, is the fact that it's not just when people move their... The reason people move their money is not just fear of economic crash. It's not just, the fact that they need to be somewhere to travel, but also, interestingly enough, let's imagine we go, there's a space currency out there somewhere. Imagine if you could convert your money to space dollars, and in space, they have a weird system where every year your money doubles. So even though one space dollar buys you one apple in the same way as one regular dollar does, then in the next year, they would give you $2 because, the interest rates there are really high because they want to encourage investment. As a result, everyone and their mothers would be moving all of their money over to space dollars, right? They'd be like, spacemen, please give us some of that space currency. And as a result, a huge amount of the value would be kept in space dollars and not regular dollars. Ultimately, eventually you would have no need for regular dollars besides to trade for things that absolutely need them, like the US government. And so as a result, that would happen. And so this is the basics of how exchange rate works. As people move, in the same way that goods go up and down in price as more people want them or fewer people want them, so too do currencies. As more people want a currency, more of the value in the world is stored in that currency, and as fewer people want a currency, less of the value in the world is stored in that currency. There are some currencies that are seen as safe havens. It used to be the Japanese yen was a good one, the Swiss franc used to traditionally be a good one, but clearly not anymore. And so as a result, right now, if you want to move your money into a currency and actually make a profit coming back from the the US dollar, it's quite hard. There's only a few real examples left in the world, with the major example being the... I think it's absolutely fascinating that Armenia is doing extra well. If you're curious as to why, it's because of the fact that lots of Russian companies are leaving because of sanctions, and one of the easiest places they can pick is Armenia. This blew my mind, but it's cool. Some people call it the Silicon Valley of the Soviet Union. But yeah, Yerevan is a very popular place for international investment right now, and so people are taking their money. You know, again, just imagine there's two currencies, the dollar and the Armenian. What is the Armenian currency called? The AMD? Let's quickly find out. USD, AMD. The Armenian dram. So Armenian drams are going up in value. You get fewer drams for your dollar because the dram is worth more now, because lots of people want the drams relative to how many people want that dollar. And so yeah, when you go as a result, loads of people want to get their money into the economy to buy things that you can only buy in drams. You know, real estate over there and hiring people over there. And so as a result, more money is in the dram than in the dollar. Whereas if we imagine the reverse thing happens, let's say that for some reason the dram the interest rate goes real down. They want to deliberately increase. If you deliberately want to devalue your own currency, you can deliberately shift money away from your currency. If the Armenian dram being expensive becomes a problem, they could actually do the reverse and say, please offload your dram, turn them into dollars or whatever else you need to, and devalue our currency. And why would a country ever do that? I think is an interesting point that I want to just discuss before we end this, because again, looking at this list of currencies, it's fascinating to see like Singapore's on there, you'd expect Switzerland's on there, Mexico is surprising, Georgia, Albania. It's all countries that you would not expect to be doing well with their currency, but actually are. You know, it's very interesting to me at the very least. And what's also really interesting to me is the fact that as we kind of go back into this, there is a need to devalue your currency sometimes, and that is why it's not necessarily the best news in the world that your currency is appreciating, but it's also not necessarily bad news when your currency depreciates. Why would you want to do this? Well, to kind of go to the global map view again, everyone knows it's our favorite thing to do here on this channel. If you are China, let's say, and your economy, so there are imports and there are exports, right? These are the majority of things that require you to use currencies that aren't your own, and every single time someone comes to your country, you know, tourism, that is effectively an export. It doesn't feel like it is. Like if someone visits London, that doesn't feel like you're exporting. It feels like you're importing a person. But no, you are exporting the value of your let's pick a place. You're exporting the value of your guitar teaching reading. If someone comes from Mexico to the UK to learn guitar from James Holt, they're going to do so as an import. If they buy food from the Asda in the Lower Ely Center, Super Center here, they're going to be taking money from their country and putting it into ours. The same happens if that same Asda or guitar teacher were to send those services, send those goods over to China or to Mexico, because they would be bringing the goods in from the UK, but giving currency in exchange. However, if your currency is worth too much, it means that lots of your people are going to import things. You know, if Mexicans, the value of their currency has gone up, therefore they're going to buy fewer things from the UK, fewer guitar teaching courses and fewer Asda products, because of so they're going to buy more of those things, and they're going to buy fewer, say, Mexican products, which is bad, especially for politicians who would rather you buy things locally, you know, because they've got constituents who would really value it. And so you're going to buy fewer things from the Plaza de la Tecnologia. So that's how you pronounce it. I nailed it. Don't anyone get at me with my pronunciation there. You're going to go to the Macro Plaza less, and you're going to spend less at KFC, that my favorite Mexican company. Okay, Quesadilla de la Abuela. You're going to spend less money there as a result of the fact that Asda is so cheap in that in the supercenter we just referenced. So why is it, therefore, that you want to lower your currency? It's so you can encourage people to spend domestically. It is a weird thing there, but also it encourages other countries to spend domestically. Indeed, if the Mexican peso dropped in value by double, then me as a British person, instead of going to the Asda, you know, I really want to go to the Asda in Ely here. Is Ely a place? Early over here. I really want to go to the Asda in Early, but it's just too expensive. Our currency's been going up in price, and so indeed, a lot of as a result of our currency going up in price, I might find it easier to go to Mexico, where now I will get more Mexican pesos for my pound, and where my plaza dealer, you get the idea. You're encouraged, instead of buying something locally, things abroad get cheaper. And in reality, these things should balance themselves out perfectly, and it's rarely cheaper to import by that much. But it does mean there is a pressure, and it does mean that there is a reason to import more when your currency is strong, and to export more when your currency is weak. As the UK's currency has gone down in value, our exports have gone a lot stronger, but our imports, and indeed the simplest one people know is when you go on holiday to the US, you used to get, if a drink cost $20, it used to cost you £10, but now it costs you, I actually don't know the maths, 20 USD to GBP. If a drink used to cost you £10, it now costs you £15. Although, if a drink actually costs you $20, it doesn't actually cost $20, does it? If a drink costs $20, it's like, yeah, make sure you tip that bartender $2 or something like that, and then also just know there's going to be a tax and an alcohol tax. And, if a drink costs you $20, it never costs you £10. But the point is, now it costs you £10 even less. And so, yeah, interestingly enough, the pound has gone down again. I wonder what the GBP is doing with the AMD. Is it still gaining against us? All currencies are in this big international marketplace in a weird way. Oh look, yeah, we've gone up against the dram. That's a good sign. 511 Armenian dram to the pound. Now is the time to invest in Armenia, or maybe it's the worst time. I don't actually know. Anyway, with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you found it interesting. But if you want to support whatever it is we do over here, then consider supporting over at Patreon. I am about to go to my 52nd country. I'm excited for it. I'll let you know how it goes. Or I'll die and I won't let you know. It'll be one of the two. You're looking great today, by the way. Is that new? Is that something new you're doing with your? You keep it up. It looks great on you. Okay, bye. I should go back to calling you sluts at the end of these videos.